Also, since we have already been using the three variables, first, second, and third, for our phase 4 appling, and we're now adding a new appling, we want to go ahead and use a different set of configuration variables. Luckily, we have all of these defined in one spot, so I can just change the screen option ID that I'm looking for without having to affect any of the code. Now, since we're going to be looking for description and background in our request, the first thing I'm going to need to do are create the keys that we're looking for. So I'll go ahead and create a constant string, and we'll call that description. And we'll create another one, and that's going to be our background. Once we get the value from the request, we're going to need to put it somewhere. So I'll go ahead and create two new variables. We'll call that description, and we'll call this background. And those are going to be where we put the values once we retrieve them. Now, one important thing to know about request parameters is that they only come in once. They come in once when you first request the web page, but then if you do something that causes a postback or a refresh, such as in our case, clicking the update button, those request parameters are lost. They don't come back in a second time. Since we always need these values in our appling, what we're going to need to do is first retrieve them when they first come in. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is say, if we're not posting back, so this is the first time that we've come into the web page, what I'm going to want to do is assign my description value equal to the request parameter with the key description. And I want to do the same thing as background. Now, in order to make these available to us when we are posting back, what I'll need to do is put them into the session. Now, the session is a dictionary that follows a user's lifespan through our web application. So the session will always be available to us, so we don't have to worry about this disappearing or the values not being there or anything like that. So I'll go ahead and set the description into the session, and we'll do the same thing for the background. Now, when we are posting back, I can get access to the description from the session. Now, the session by default returns values as objects, and since we want it to be a string, I'll just call toString on that. And for our background, we'll do the same thing. So when we reach this point, we know that we always have the description and we have the background, no matter if we're posting back or not. All that's left to do is to display the description that we got on our appling. And for the background, let's go ahead and change the background color of our appling to whatever background set or passed in. So let's go into the markup. And the first thing I need is an area to display that description. So let's go ahead and go to our toolbox, and I'll grab a label. And a label is just like a text box, only it's not editable, which is exactly what we want. I'll go ahead and put a few breaks in there. And let's change the ID of this label to be description. Again, we have run at server on here, so it's accessible from the code behind page. And I don't need text. Now the other thing is we need to set the background of our applet. The easiest way to do that is on the body element. And what I'll do is set its ID to be body. And even though it wasn't run at server when we started, all I have to do is set it to be run at server. And now we have access to the body element from our code behind page. So what I'll do is create a new function, and we'll call that setup description. And all we're going to do is access that label we just created and set its text equal to our description value. And then I'll go ahead and call that function from right here, where we know we always have the description value retrieved. Now for the background, I want to do the same thing. Now the first thing to think of is that that background value can be a few different things. Let's assume we're going to stick with red, green, and maybe yellow. So red, or let's go with green. Green can come in as green, as green, as green, etc. And so we don't want to have to try and figure out every possible case that all these capital letters can come in. So instead, what we're going to do is going to go ahead and create a switch statement, which is just a fancy if-else. And we're going to get that background value, and I'm going to call toUpper invariant. And that's going to uppercase the background value regardless of what culture you're in. And so now we have a case for red. We have a case for green. And let's say those are the only two colors we support. We do need to notify somebody that these are the only two colors we support, because if they pass in yellow and we don't do anything, the rules developer is going to have to call us and we're going to have to explain to them that we don't support yellow. We can save ourselves that phone call by just putting in a default case right here and throwing an exception. In this case, we're going to throw a not implemented exception, which is pretty appropriate. And all I'm going to say is AppLink currently does not support a background value of color. Now you notice I put that curly brace 0 in the string. I could concatenate the string together, but I don't want to do that. Instead, what I'll do is use a method string.format, and then all I'll do is pass in our background value so it shows up in our string. To give you an example of how string.format works, I could also do a curly brace 1 and then pass in another string. And I would see the background value here, and I'd see some value over here. So let's go ahead and set our background color. I go into the body element, I go into its styles, and I'm going to add a new CSS property. And CSS is just a real clean way to control the font size, position, colors, and all of that of HTML elements. In this case, I'll set the background color to be red. And we'll do the same thing over here, except we'll set it to green. And then all I have to do is call setUpBackground from our function, and we are ready to go. So let's go ahead and build the solution. I would move those assemblies over, but you already know how to do that. We'll go into Design Studio, and we'll need to create a few rules to do this. So let's go ahead and create a condition. And we'll create our configuration variables, which will be phase 5 first. We're all set. Now, if you recall, the goal of this is we need to build up a URL to call into our AppLink that looks like this.